So here we are on the first floor of Nash's house, which is part of the exhibition space. Within the exhibition here, we're telling the story of both New Place, its entire history, and Shakespeare's ownership. He purchased the house and owned it for 19 years until his death in 1616. So there's several stories that we're wanting to communicate to our audiences here. The story of New Place, the story of Shakespeare's purchase, but also the story of Shakespeare the man, widening out that idea of Shakespeare being something more and above and beyond the writer. Fantastic writer, that's his legacy to us today. But of course he was also a very successful businessman, a shareholder in the theatre company, a shareholder in the Globe, a lot of business dealings, and a huge investor within Stratford. It's really interesting that Shakespeare, so famous for his theatre at the time, famous in his own lifetime, decides to buy New Place here in Stratford-upon-Avon and invest an awful lot of money within this particular area, which tells us a lot about the connections between him, the place where he was born, the place where he grew up. An area of the exhibition upstairs where we'll have a stage set with costumes representing Shakespeare, his wife, and his two daughters, who were aged 12 and 14 at the time that Shakespeare purchased New Place in 1597. And here we'll have a stage set with animation and screens communicating various different stories of the aspects of his life. Shakespeare left us an incredible legacy in the form of his poetry and his plays. But the very first legacy in many ways that he left to us was his will. Shakespeare's will is an incredible document. It gives us an insight into the mind of William Shakespeare the man, who he chose to leave his money to, and the other bequests that are listed in that document. At the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, we are fortunate enough to have in our collections an executor's copy of the will, which will be going on display here in the New Place exhibition, alongside examples of some of the objects that he left to various family members. He left his youngest daughter a silver gilt drinking bowl. We have an example of that in our collection. He also chose to leave his dress sword to a close friend. It's a real status symbol, the dress sword. Being a gentleman, having a coat of arms, gave Shakespeare the right to carry a sword in public. So it's a very personal item that again tells us something about the way he was thinking and who he chooses to leave that item to. So here in the heart of Nash's house is one of the areas where we've had to do a considerable amount of conservation work to this fabulous building. The staircase have actually started to move quite dramatically, and part of the works here have been to brace the staircase and put it back into line with the rest of the building. Here is where old will meet new. I'm standing in part of Nash's house, the Victorian extension to the original 1530s building, and on this side here is where we're dropping in the extension to the building that will provide access from the Great Garden, the Rock Garden and the New Place site to actually join the two buildings together. And all of this work has also given us the opportunity to increase access into a historic building, and we're installing a lift shaft to enable access to the upper floors. So the ground floor of Nash's house will be the first encounter with an exhibition space that our visitors make, and it is here that we'll tell the story of New Place itself. Shakespeare purchased New Place, but the building was actually already more than 100 years old, having been built by the Clopton family in 1483. So it was a house that had status and reputation within Stratford-upon-Avon. It was a significant property standing in a significant place in the centre of town, right next door to the Guild Chapel. So there's various stories that we want to be able to tell here. The complete history of New Place and why it is no longer here. And obviously Shakespeare's purchase of that and his ownership of 19 years, and those two stories overlap. So here we're planning on having a large model of the house where people will be able to take a peek into the life of the Shakespeare family, and also timelines that actually communicate that information, the timeline of New Place, the timeline of Shakespeare, and how those two overlap for the period of his ownership.